The 4-year echo. He said, "You disgust me." She cried when she saw his eyes on her twins. He was a high-powered CEO who prioritized success. She was a woman who gave up everything for love. The turning point. A cruel rejection led to a silent sacrifice, only to have fate bring them back together in the most unexpected place, a hospital corridor. The door slam heard round the world. He slammed the door in her face with the words, "You disgust me." 4 years later, he broke down crying at the sight of the children who looked just like him. Maya Brooks had always believed love wasn't supposed to hurt like that. She had given up everything she once thought she wanted because she believed she had finally found someone worth changing her life for. Declan Pierce, one of Chicago's most successful CEOs, had swept her into a world she had only seen in movies. Penthouse apartments overlooking a city that glittered like diamonds. Dinners at restaurants where months-long reservations could suddenly appear with her name on them. Cars so silent, they made her heartbeat sound loud. He was magnetic, handsome, with hair as dark as midnight and eyes the color of a clear winter sky. And every woman wanted him, and for a moment, he chose her. In private, behind closed doors, he held her like she was the only warm thing in his cold world. He whispered that she made him forget the noise in his head. And she believed every word, even when his touch grew distant, even when his smile didn't quite reach his eyes. She had been so desperate to keep that version of him alive that she ignored the signs of the storm brewing. The day everything shattered started like any other. Maya made breakfast, kissed Declan's cheek before he left for his morning meetings, and spent the afternoon finishing a marketing project she hoped would impress him. When he returned home, she could see he was exhausted, the tension in his jaw, his shoulders rigid beneath his expensive suit. But she wouldn't let fear stop her. She took a deep breath, walked up to him with her heart in her hands, and told him she was pregnant. She braced herself for surprise, confusion, perhaps even anger. But deep down, she hoped for tenderness, a smile, a hug, something to tell her she hadn't been a fool for loving him. Instead, Declan looked at her with an expression that froze her blood. No shock, no hesitation, just cold calculation, as if analyzing a spreadsheet with a percentage he didn't like. For too many seconds, he said nothing. Then, with an exhale of sheer revulsion, he pulled away from her. When he finally spoke, his voice was flat and cutting, like steel grating against glass. "You disgust me." Maya, at first, didn't think she heard him correctly. The words were so vile, so cruel, that her brain refused to process them. But then he walked toward the door without looking back, and the finality of his steps hit harder than the insult itself. He opened the door, paused as if deciding if he owed her anything more, and then slammed it shut behind him. Silence swallowed the room. Maya stood frozen, every cell in her body trembling. She wrapped her arms around her stomach, as if protecting the tiny life inside from the words that had cut so deep. She could still hear the echo of, "You disgust me," reverberating in her chest like a runaway heartbeat. Tears came so fast, she choked on them, dropping to the floor as if her legs no longer remembered how to hold her up. She didn't know how long she stayed there, curled up, the gleaming skyline outside mocking her with its beauty. The apartment felt daunting and hostile without him in it, as if the walls themselves had turned against her. When the sun rose, painting the city gold, Maya realized none of her life belonged to her anymore. Declan had replaced the furniture, chosen the decor, dictated every plan and decision. Her family was hundreds of miles away, and she hadn't spoken to her friends in months because her entire world had been consumed by him. There was no room for her there anymore, no reason left to stay. With mechanical motions, she stood and began to pack. She only took what belonged to her, a few articles of clothing, some books, her laptop, and the tiny ultrasound photo she had taken earlier that week. The photo that had filled her with joy before he corrupted it with his rejection. She left her key on the counter. There was nothing more to say. She boarded a bus that night, her stomach churning with nausea and grief, watching the city that once promised her everything blur into a smear of lights and memories she could no longer bear to hold on to. As the miles passed, Maya pressed a protective hand over her abdomen, whispering in a voice shattered by tears. "I'm sorry you heard that. I won't let anyone speak to us like that again. I won't let you feel unwanted." Ever. She had no idea where she was going. She had no idea how she would survive. But she knew one thing. Declan Pierce would never get another chance to break her again. That night, somewhere between cities she couldn't name and the future she couldn't see, she fell asleep curled against the bus window, exhaustion finally claiming her. And in that vulnerable moment, her last coherent thought was both a promise and a plea that someday this pain would mean something. That someday she wouldn't remember his rejection as the end of her story, but as the start of one worth living for. Call to action. Vote now. If you were Maya, would you have left immediately or tried to confront him one last time? Comment your answer below. And like this video if you believe she made the right choice for her child. 2 heartbeats, 1 new life. The bus stopped in a quiet town just before dawn, the kind of place that doesn't make headlines, where no one looked twice at a stranger getting off with a single suitcase and tired eyes. Maya didn't choose the town because it was special. She chose Maplewood because she was too exhausted to stay on the road any longer. And something about the peaceful quiet of the early streets made her feel like she could finally breathe again. The buildings were old but well kept, the sidewalks cracked but clean, and the air smelled of pine and distant rain. It was a place untouched by people like Declan Pierce, and for the first time in days, she didn't feel haunted by his voice. She found a room to rent above a bakery, where the landlord asked no questions. The scent of fresh bread drifted through the floorboards every morning, a strange comfort that reminded her she was still alive. She found a small clinic nearby and started her prenatal checkups again. The doctor was kind and gentle and never asked why she was alone. She built up the courage to apply for a part-time job at a small bookstore across the street. The owner was an older woman named Ruth, who didn't care about resumes as long as Maya showed up on time and loved books. Maya did both. She shelved, checked out customers, and spent her lunch breaks reading books on pregnancy, trying to prepare for the only future she had now. Her pregnancy wasn't easy. She was constantly tired. Her body ached in ways she'd never known. The doctor confirmed what she had begun to suspect. Twins. Maya sat in stunned silence as she watched the monitor, seeing 2 small heartbeats fluttering. She smiled, but tears fell at the same time. 2 heartbeats meant double the diapers, double the crying, double the fear, but it also meant double the love. And in her heart, she knew it wasn't an accident. Life had taken everything from her, but it was giving her these 2 souls. They were the reason she would survive. As the weeks passed, she began to build a life from scratch. She went to work, saved of every penny, learned how to stretch meals and budget every dime. She bought second-hand baby clothes, read parenting forums late into the night, and painted the small back room soft colors, 1 wall at a time. There were days she woke up paralyzed with fear, overwhelmed by how alone she was. Nights where she felt the pain of his rejection, like a bruise that hadn't healed. But every time one of the babies kicked, she remembered why she couldn't fall apart. She talked to them constantly, telling them stories, singing softly as she folded their laundry or rubbed her swollen belly. She wasn't sure if they could feel how much she loved them, but she hoped they did. One cold, late autumn night, the pain came too soon. She collapsed on the bathroom floor, barely able to reach her phone. Ambulance lights flashed like lightning through the windows. In the hospital, everything blurred into noise and bright white light. Nurses worked quickly, voices calm but urgent. She was terrified. It was too soon. It wasn't time. But her body had made its decision, and all she could do was hold on. Hours later, when she woke, her arms were empty, and her voice cracked as she asked if the babies were alive. They were. 2 premature babies, tiny but fighting. The doctor told her they were strong, that they had a chance, but the road ahead would be hard. Maya spent the next few weeks in the NICU, barely sleeping, her chair dragged beside 2 incubators, where her children fought to breathe. She named them Ava and Noah. They were so small, their hands no bigger than the tip of her finger. She read to them every day. She held them skin to skin when the nurses allowed. She sang the lullabies her mother once sang to her. Every beep of the machines made her heart stop. Every pause in their breathing stole the air from her lungs. She lived minute by minute, beat by beat. The nurses started calling her the fighter. They said she was the calmest mother on the ward, the one who never broke down, the one who whispered hope to her babies even when the monitors screamed. But they didn't see the nights Maya spent in the hospital bathroom, curled up on the tile floor, sobbing into her hands. They didn't hear the prayers she whispered to a God she wasn't even sure she still believed in. All she knew was that she had to stay. She had to keep showing up. She had to be strong, even when she wasn't. When Ava finally opened her eyes for the first time, Maya laughed through her tears. When Noah wrapped his fingers around hers, she knew she would never let go. They were hers, not his, not anyone else's. Hers. The world could take everything, but it could never take this. And even in the darkest hours of that hospital ward, she started to believe, perhaps just barely, that this pain was not the end. It was the beginning of something no one could ever take away. The day Maya finally brought Ava and Noah home was cold. The kind of winter morning where frost clung to every window pane and the air bit her cheeks the instant she stepped outside. But to her, it felt like the first day of spring. After almost 2 months in the NICU, 2 months of hourly updates, of living amidst monitors and whispered medical terms, she was finally allowed to hold her children, not just for hours, but forever. Bundled in small coats, too big for their fragile bodies, her babies were wrapped up like hope, tucked into blankets. And as she stepped into the small apartment above the bakery once more, her eyes welled up. Everything looked the same. Worn carpet, peeling wallpaper, a second-hand crib tucked into the corner. But it felt completely new. This was no longer the place she fled to. It was the place they would grow up. The first few weeks were a blur of feedings, sleepless nights, and moments of panic when one of the babies wouldn't stop crying, and she didn't know why. Maya had no one to call, no mother or sister to lean on, no friend to knock on her door with hot soup or an extra set of arms. It was just her. Sometimes, in the middle of the night, she would sit on the floor between the 2 cribs, clutching a cold bottle in one hand, rocking a baby with her knee, trying not to cry from exhaustion. But every time one of the twins looked up at her, with those wide blue eyes that mirrored a past she was trying to forget, she found the strength to keep going. Not because it was easy. It never was. But because she had made them a promise the day they were born, they would never feel unwanted. She returned to work at the bookstore when the twins were almost 3 months old, leaving them at a small in-home daycare run by a retired nurse named June. It hurt Maya to leave that first morning, dropping off her babies with a stranger, but she had no other choice. She needed money. The rent was due. Formula wasn't cheap. Diapers never lasted as long as she hoped. At the bookstore, her hands shelved novels while her mind stayed with her children. But slowly, a rhythm began to form. Wake, feed, dress, daycare, work, pickup, dinner, bath, stories, collapse into sleep, and start again. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't what she once imagined. But it was real, and it was theirs. Question time. Hiding the truth. Maya chose to erase Declan from her life to protect her children. Do you agree with her decision to keep their father a secret? Tell us your honest opinion in the comments. Subscribe for more emotionally powerful stories. Despite how hard she tried to forget, there were moments the past broke the surface. Every time a tall man in a tailored suit walked into the shop, her heart stopped before her mind caught up. Declan's face haunted her in the smallest details. The way Noah tilted his head when he was curious, the exact shade of Ava's eyes, that icy blue that didn't come from her. She didn't speak his name. She didn't tell the children where they came from. At first, she thought it was fear that kept her silent. But as time went on, she realized it was protection. She didn't want them growing up feeling like a mistake by someone who had walked away. At night, when the twins were finally asleep and the apartment was quiet, Maya sometimes allowed herself to remember. She would sit by the window with a cup of cold tea and look out at the tranquil street. She thought about who she used to be. The girl who believed love could fix broken things. The woman who stood in a penthouse thinking a man like Declan could want her forever. That woman had died the day he slammed the door. But something else had been born in her place. Someone stronger. Someone fiercer. Someone who didn't need to be chosen to know her worth. And yet, there were cracks. As much as she worked to build a wall between then and now, sometimes she caught herself wondering if he ever thought about them. She would wonder where he went. Did he ever wake up in the middle of the night, haunted by what he said, by what he lost? Or had he moved on so easily, so completely, that their lives didn't even flicker in his memory? She didn't know which was worse, him forgetting, or him remembering and not caring. Still, Maya kept going. The bookstore became more than a job. Ruth became a friend. Sometimes a grandmother figure to the twins, slipping them storybooks and warm muffins. June watched the children when Maya took extra shift, or when a fever struck in the middle of the night. Slowly, she found a family of sorts, not by blood, but by kindness and shared survival. She still carried the weight of everything alone, but it no longer crushed her. It simply became part of her. And as Ava and Noah grew, taking their first steps, saying their first words, laughing and crying in unison, like the two halves of her heart, Maya knew it didn't matter how painful her story had been. It had led her to this. It had led her to them. And that was worth every tear, every sleepless night, every memory she wished she could erase. They weren't the end of her old life. They were the beginning of a new one. One she had built with nothing but courage, love, and the quiet belief that even the most broken things can bloom again. Declan Pierce hadn't thought about Maya Brooks in a long time, or at least, that's what he told himself. His days were crammed with meetings, travel, headlines, and polished dinners where no one spoke the truth. His empire had grown. His name was etched on skyscrapers and luxury brands, and his face appeared on magazine covers next to numbers that only climbed higher with every quarter. But the silence that filled his penthouse at night was the kind that got under your skin. He had women, plenty of them, beautiful, ambitious, carefully selected to match his lifestyle, none of whom lasted more than a few weeks. They came and went, as if he were changing the decor. And yet, none of them stayed. None of them made him feel anything anymore. Once in a blue moon, he would scroll through old photos on his phone, pretending he was only clearing up storage. When his thumb would freeze over a picture he forgot hadn't been deleted. Maya laughing in the sunlight on the balcony. Maya curled up on the couch with a book. Maya holding an ultrasound with a shaky hand. Tears in her eyes. Hope and fear intertwined. That last one he deleted. Finally. But the image stayed in his mind longer than he cared to admit. He remembered the day she left, the way her face had sunken, how quiet she had been. In that moment, he had convinced himself it was mercy, that she was too soft for his world, that he would have destroyed her eventually. But now he wondered if the destruction had already happened, the moment he turned the knob, and didn't look back. What brought her back into his world wasn't guilt, or even memory. It was a coincidence, or maybe something crueler. His company sponsored a charity event at an upstate hospital, one of the many facilities his name was attached to through funding and investments. He didn't like public visits, but the board insisted on a photo opportunity. So he came. Camera flashes, forced smiles, cold hallways, and the usual parade of small talk. He shook hands with doctors, glanced at children he barely noticed, until one of the nurses asked if he'd like to visit the neonatal wing. Something about the way she said it made him pause, and not knowing why, he agreed. The room was quiet, a cocoon of soft beeps and sterile air, filled with new mothers and sleeping babies. And then he saw her. At first he thought he was imagining it. She was turned away, gently rocking a baby in her arms, wearing a yellow sweater, her hair pulled up in a messy bun. She looked thinner, paler, but unmistakable. He stopped breathing. His world shrank to the space between her and the child she held, and then she turned, and her green eyes met his. Her lips parted, but she didn't speak. She just stood frozen, like a deer caught in the headlights, like a dream that had turned into something real and dangerous. But it wasn't just her. Beside her was another baby in a pink bassinet, identical to the one she held, and both had dark hair and piercing blue eyes, eyes that looked too familiar, too specific to ignore. He felt it in his gut, the cold punch of recognition. Twins. Girls. About a year old, maybe less. Eyes like his. It was impossible, and yet it wasn't at all. He felt the floor shift beneath him. For the first time in years, he couldn't think. He couldn't calculate. He couldn't control his face. He just stared, wide-eyed, open-mouthed, until the nurse beside him touched his arm and asked if he was okay. Maya turned away, clutching both children protectively. She didn't say a word. She didn't give him a chance to speak. A moment later, she was gone, out the door with her daughters, leaving him in a fluorescent-lit hallway, with nothing but silence and the pulsing echo of his own heartbeat. Declan stood there long after she left, unable to move. He barely heard the rest of the tour, couldn't remember what he said to the press. On the flight back to New York, he didn't open his laptop. For the first time in a long time, business meant nothing. Numbers offered no distraction. All he could see was Maya's face, the babies, his daughters. He didn't know how to explain what he felt. It wasn't just shock. It wasn't just guilt. It was something deeper. A kind of loss he didn't yet understand. A realization that while he had been building towers of steel and glass, something real had grown without him. Something beautiful. And he had missed it all. He didn't go home that night. He walked the streets for hours, his hands shoved deep in his coat pockets, his head down. His reflection in the windows looked like a stranger, and somewhere between Madison Avenue and the park, where no one recognized him, Declan Pierce, the man who thought he could buy or rebuild anything, finally realized he might have destroyed the one thing that truly mattered before it ever had a chance to start. Call to action. What's his next move? Declan is heartbroken. What should he do now to earn Maya's forgiveness and meet his children? Comment with your advice. Don't forget to subscribe. Earning forgiveness. One day at a time, Declan didn't sleep the night after he saw Maya again. No matter how many times he closed his eyes, the image of her standing in that hospital hallway with 2 babies in her arms, babies who looked unmistakably like him, played on a loop in his mind. The shock had left him breathless, but now it was replaced by something much worse: remorse. The silence that had once protected his pride now felt suffocating. He had spent the last 4 years pretending he made the right decision, believing that pushing her away had been an act of strength, not cowardice. But seeing the result of that decision so vividly shattered every illusion. He hadn't just walked away from her. He had walked away from them. The next morning, he didn't go to the office. For the first time in years, he canceled all his meetings, turned off his phone, and ignored the incessant buzzing of his assistant. Instead, he sat in the corner of his sleek, cold kitchen, made of glass and marble, but utterly lifeless, and tried to figure out how he could fix what he had broken. He had no contact for her. She had vanished from his world without a trace after that night. Part of him had always assumed it was for the best. He figured she would move on, forget him, maybe even be better off. But she hadn't just moved on. She had built a life without him, a life that included his children. And she had done it alone. He hired a private investigator, someone discreet. He hated the thought of invading her privacy, but he knew no other way. Within a few days, the man returned with a small file. Maya Brooks, residing in a quiet suburb 2 hours north of the city. A modest apartment above a small bookstore, no romantic affiliations. Works part-time at the same shop. Raising 2 children, Ava and Noah. Healthy. Active. Described by neighbors as warm, responsible, and reserved. No mention of their father anywhere. It was as if Declan had been erased. But when he saw the photographs, Maya carrying the twins into a local park, crouching to wipe tears or tie shoes, always alone, he felt a sharp, bitter ache settle in his chest. He didn't know how to approach her. Forcing his way in would feel like a violation, but staying away was no longer an option. So he drove there one afternoon, his heart pounding, his hand sweating, rehearsing every possible way to say what couldn't be unsaid. He didn't expect to be welcomed. He expected anger, maybe even hate. What he didn't expect was to find her working behind the counter, her hair pulled back, a tired smile on her face as she handed a customer a receipt. She looked up, and the moment she saw him, the smile vanished. The color drained from her face, but she didn't say a word. She walked into the back room and closed the door. Declan stood frozen. The air in the bookstore felt heavier now. The customer glanced at him curiously before leaving. He waited, unsure if he should follow her, unsure if he had the right. But after a minute, she returned. Her eyes were glassy, and her voice, when she spoke, was quiet and composed. She told him she didn't want a scene, that the twins were safe, that they didn't know who he was, and she didn't plan on changing that. He tried to speak, but she cut him off. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. That almost hurt more. She simply told him he had nothing to say to a man who had once looked her in the eye and told her she was disgusting, and then vanished when she needed him most. He asked if he could meet the children. She shook her head. She said they weren't a second chance for him to feel better. They weren't a performance. They were people, small, innocent people, who had never heard his name. And he had no right to show up 4 years later and demand inclusion just because he suddenly realized he missed out. He asked if there was anything he could do. She said no, and then she told him to leave. But Declan didn't leave Maplewood. He stayed at a nearby hotel. He spent his days sitting in his car at the end of the bookstore's street, watching her carry the twins home, helping them put on their coats, laughing at something one of them said. He watched them through the bakery window, sitting on stools, legs swinging, their faces identical to photos from his own childhood. He saw Noah chase a leaf down the sidewalk and Ava fall asleep against Maya's shoulder. He wasn't stalking. He was witnessing what he had missed. It felt both cruel and necessary. And one night, when Maya saw his car parked across the street and didn't approach to scream or ask why, he knew it was the start of something. Not forgiveness, but a crack in the wall. He left her a letter at the bookstore. Not to beg, just to explain. Not as the man who once broke her heart, but as the man who had finally seen what that decision had cost. He told her about the dreams he'd had since the hospital, about how nothing felt whole anymore. He said he expected nothing, not even a response. He just needed her to know that he saw them, all 3 of them, and that he wasn't going to disappear again. She didn't reply. Not at first. But a week later, he found a note slipped under his car windshield. 4 words. They start school Monday. It wasn't an invitation. It wasn't a welcome. But it was something. And for Declan, it was enough to believe that maybe, just maybe, the story wasn't over. That maybe, if he was patient, if he showed up every day with humility instead of excuses, he might one day earn the right to be part of the life he had once so carelessly walked away from. Declan didn't know what to expect that Monday morning, but he woke up before his alarm. He dressed in a dark sweater instead of a suit, and he drove through the quiet streets, his heart racing in a way it never did for boardrooms or billion-dollar mergers. The small local elementary school was tucked between 2 old brick buildings, its playground empty in the morning mist. He parked across the street, far enough away not to be noticed, close enough to see. When Maya arrived with the twins, holding a small hand in each of hers, he nearly stopped breathing. Ava was wearing a purple coat with stars on the sleeves. Noah's was green with dinosaur patches. They looked too small for the backpacks they carried. Declan watched as Maya knelt to zip up Noah's jacket and kissed the top of Ava's head. He didn't try to approach them. He just watched, a knot in his throat, as the door closed behind them and his chance to start, however small, slipped into a building full of possibilities. The next few days went the same way. Declan kept his distance, never approaching, never intruding. He didn't want to force his way into their world like a storm. He wanted to be consistent, present, even if he wasn't noticed. After a week, Maya started acknowledging him with the smallest nod when she saw him across the street. Then, one afternoon, as he waited outside the school, he saw Noah bolt out the doors, trip over his shoelaces, and fall hard. Declan didn't think. He moved. He crossed the street before he realized he had done it and knelt beside the child just as Maya reached him. Noah wasn't crying yet, more stunned than hurt. Declan gently scooped him up and handed him to Maya, asking if he was okay. His eyes searched her face, and for a moment the years seemed to fall away. She nodded, and although she said nothing, she didn't pull Noah away from him. The next day, when Ava walked past him and paused for a second out of curiosity, Declan smiled. She didn't smile back, but she didn't look scared. That night, Maya texted him. "If this is serious, they start soccer next week, Saturday morning. Don't be late." He didn't sleep well that night. Not out of anxiety, but out of hope. It had been so long since he allowed himself to feel it. Saturday arrived with early sun and dewy grass. Declan got to the field before anyone, watching the volunteers set up cones and mini goals. When Maya arrived with the twins, she walked right up to him. She handed him a water bottle and sunblock for Noah, and said if he was going to be there, he might as well be useful. Declan smiled and followed her lead, listening intently as she gave directions. For the entire morning, he tied shoelaces, passed out juice boxes, and cheered from the sidelines. The first time Ava scored a goal, she looked over at him, and he clapped so hard, half the field turned around. Her cheeks flushed, but she smiled just a little, and that was enough to make his chest ache. After practice, Maya didn't rush off as usual. They sat on a picnic bench while the kids played. The conversation started cautiously, polite, about the children's teachers, their favorite bedtime books, their personalities, Ava's quiet strength, Noah's boundless energy. Declan absorbed every word, and then, after a long pause, Maya asked the question that had lived between them unspoken for years. Why now? Declan didn't dodge. He told her the truth. He told her he thought about her more than he admitted, that he buried it under work and silence and excuses. He told her that seeing her in the hospital wasn't a coincidence. It was a revelation, like a curtain being pulled back. He told her he knew he didn't deserve her forgiveness, that he had no right to ask to be part of the twins' lives after walking away, but that he couldn't stay away now that he knew them. He said he wanted to show up, to try, not to fix the past, but to earn a place in their present. Maya didn't respond immediately. She looked at the children, watching them chase a butterfly across the grass. Her voice was soft when she finally spoke. She told him she had hated him. Genuinely, deeply hated him for a long time. But she let it go when Ava first called her mama, and when Noah ran to her after his first nightmare. She said forgiveness didn't mean forgetting, and it didn't mean trusting overnight. But she didn't want her children growing up missing out on something that could be good, if it was handled carefully. Declan nodded. He told her he would wait for as long as it took, that he wouldn't pressure them or push his way in, that he would be there every weekend for soccer, every afternoon he was allowed to be near. And someday, when the children were ready, he would be the one to answer their questions honestly, no matter how uncomfortable it was. The quiet bridge of presence, the weeks passed like that, each one warmer than the last. Declan became a quiet fixture in their world. He learned what Ava liked on her pancakes, and how Noah liked to be spun around before bedtime. He was allowed to pick them up from school once a week. He started reading bedtime stories on Thursdays, while Maya caught up on emails. They didn't talk about the past often. But one night, as the twins slept in the next room and they shared coffee over the kitchen counter, Maya said she never expected to feel safe with him again. But now, sometimes, she did. Not always. Not fully. But sometimes. Declan didn't respond with words. He just looked at her with the kind of quiet remorse that couldn't be faked. And in that moment, she didn't see the man who walked away years ago, but the one who was staying now. Not to be forgiven, but to become worthy of forgiveness. The autumn crept in with slow, golden fingers, painting the town in amber, burnt orange, and quiet nostalgia. Leaves crunched underfoot on the small path leading to Maya's apartment, and every evening, Declan found himself arriving a little earlier than necessary, just to walk that path, to feel the earth move beneath him in a way that reminded him that change, real change, was always gradual. Maya had stopped looking surprised when he showed up. She even texted him reminders now about soccer schedules, school plays, dentist appointments. They weren't romantic texts, and she signed off only with her name, never anything softer. But Declan read each one like a thread, holding him tethered to something that mattered more than anything else he had ever built in boardrooms or behind polished glass. The twins had changed too. Not in a dramatic, cinematic way, but in small details that were etched deep in his heart. Ava had started reaching for his hand without thinking when they crossed the street. Noah had taken up the habit of showing him his drawings after school, narrating every crayon-scribbled detail with such pride that Declan began saving every drawing, stacking them in a folder he carried back to his penthouse, even though that home felt emptier with every passing week. His place was still quiet, still elegant and sterile, but now it seemed to echo with things that weren't there. Footsteps too light to leave prints, laughter that never touched those walls, bedtime stories that had no room to unfold, in rooms built for silence. One Friday night, after dinner, baths and pajamas, Maya was curled on the couch, reading emails on her laptop, while Declan helped the twins build a pillow fort in the living room. They were deep into it, blankets over chairs, sofa cushions as walls, a flashlight as their campfire. When the phone rang, Maya's voice changed as she answered. Declan couldn't hear the words, but he felt the shift in the air, the sudden stillness in her shoulders, the way she stood up too fast and dropped her phone on the kitchen table with trembling fingers. He was by her side in seconds, asking what was wrong, and she finally whispered the word that chilled him. Hospital. It was her mother. A stroke. Sudden. Severe. She lived 3 hours away. Alone, estranged for years after a lifetime of disappointment and distance. Maya looked torn between fear and responsibility. She said she had to go. Tonight. She couldn't take the children. She didn't know how long she would be gone. Declan didn't wait for her to ask. He told her to pack a bag and leave. He would stay with the twins. It wasn't even a question. For a moment, it looked like she might argue, but then her eyes filled with something quieter. Trust, or maybe exhaustion. And she nodded. She kissed the children quickly, told them she had to visit Grandma, and promised to call in the morning. Declan helped her carry her bag to the car. She didn't say thank you. She didn't have to. The hours that followed were a blur of bedtime routines. Some tears from Ava, who missed her mommy, and Noah crawling into Declan's lap, asking if he was going to sleep here. Declan nodded and said yes, if it was okay. He slept on the couch, barely sleeping, listening to every creak of the building, every shift in the wind. In the morning, he made pancakes from a box he found in the cupboard and burned the first batch. The children laughed and told him Mommy always burned the first ones too. And for the first time, he felt like he belonged. Maya stayed at the hospital for 2 days. During that time, Declan became everything. Cook, chauffeur, storyteller, lullaby singer, fort builder, sock finder. He made mistakes. He gave them cereal for dinner one night and forgot the class picture form until Ava reminded him with a stern 4-year-old stare. But he was there, completely. No distractions, no calls from the office, no thoughts of stock prices or mergers. Just them. When Maya finally returned, pale and tired, Declan opened the door and saw something break in her expression. Not sadness, but relief. She walked in, and the twins ran to her, clutching her legs, talking over each other in a frenzy of welcome. Declan stood back, watching the reunion, not wanting to intrude. But when Maya turned to him, she didn't ask him to leave. She said thank you, softly, as if it carried more than just gratitude. Then she said something else, something that surprised them both. She asked if he wanted to stay for dinner. That night, they ate together, not as guests, not as strangers, but as something closer to a family, even if no one dared say the word. After the children fell asleep, Declan helped her clear the dishes. Maya leaned against the counter, her hands in the soapy water, and for the first time in years, she talked to him about her mother. The years of silence, the bitter fights, the loneliness. And then she said something he never expected. She said if she had faced this alone a year ago, she would have broken. But this time, she didn't. Because of him. Declan didn't know what to say, so he didn't speak. He just stood there, beside her, and dried a plate. And when she turned and gently rested her forehead against his chest, he held her, carefully, like something fragile. And he didn't let go. He stayed that night again. Not because he asked, and not because she said yes, but because there was no need to ask anymore. Something unspoken had shifted. The past hadn't disappeared. But for the first time, it wasn't a wall. It was a bridge. One built slowly, painfully, and with a kind of love that wasn't advertised, but revealed over time, in burnt pancakes, in soccer games, in sitting next to someone in silence when there were no right words. Just presence. Declan lay awake on the couch long after the lights went out. The hum of the heater, the only sound. He listened to the quiet breathing of his children down the hall and the soft creak of Maya's footsteps upstairs. And for the first time since he met her, he wasn't planning how to win or fix or prove anything. He was just there, and it was enough. The birthday promise. Winter melted into spring slowly that year, as if the world was waking up from something heavy. Snowbanks shrank to puddles. Trees began to bud again. And for the first time in a long time, the air didn't feel like something they had to survive. Maya stood at the kitchen window one Saturday morning, watching the children draw on the sidewalk with chalk, while Declan helped them spell out their names in colorful, clumsy letters. She sipped her coffee in silence, trying to grasp the feeling blooming inside her. It wasn't certainty, not exactly, but something close. A quiet peace. She had spent so many years learning to do everything on her own, learning not to need, not to rely, not to expect. But now she didn't feel like she was alone. Not anymore. Declan had become a permanent fixture in their lives. Not a guest, not a stranger. He knew the names of their stuffed animals, the sound of Ava's cry when it wasn't real, the way Noah went quiet instead of loud when he was overwhelmed. He knew what brand of toothpaste they liked, and which bedtime story Maya used when she needed them to fall asleep fast. More than that, he knew Maya. The real one. The one who wasn't polished or guarded. The one who got frustrated over bills and anxious about doctor's appointments and teared up when Ava called her brave. She had stopped hiding from him, and he never used anything she shared against her. That alone was something she never thought she would feel again. Security. He didn't ask her for anything. No promise. No declaration. He never brought up the past unless she did, and even then, he didn't try to rewrite it. He admitted his failures without deflection. That kind of honesty wasn't flashy or romantic. It was hard and quiet, and it made her trust him more than flowers ever could. Maya had spent so much time afraid that opening the door again would mean being hurt again. But day after day, Declan hadn't just knocked on the door. He had rebuilt it with her. As the twins' 4th birthday approached, they asked if Daddy could come to their party. Maya didn't correct them. She just smiled and said, of course. They planned a small gathering at the park with a handful of friends, balloons tied to picnic tables, a cake shaped like a rocket ship, because Noah had become obsessed with space. Declan showed up early. He helped Maya carry folding chairs from the car and wore the paper party hat that Ava insisted he couldn't take off all day. When the children blew out their candles, Declan stood next to Maya, a hand resting gently on her lower back. Not possessive, just present. She leaned into him without thinking. It felt right. After the party, as the sun set and the guests had gone home, Declan didn't leave. The children were playing on the grass, too full of sugar and laughter to notice the heaviness in the air. Maya turned to him, her voice low, and told him she wasn't scared anymore. Not of him, not of what they were becoming. She told him love didn't scare her. Losing him did. But what scared her most was rejecting him before it had a chance to exist. Declan didn't respond with a speech. He didn't kneel or make dramatic declarations. He simply took her hand and told her that everything he had ever run from in his life, vulnerability, truth, connection, had led him right here. And this time, he wasn't running. He told her he didn't need a label. He didn't need a timeline. He just needed to be with her, be a part of their lives in whatever way she allowed, for as long as she let him. That night, after the twins fell asleep, and the stars came out one by one, they sat on the front steps of their apartment, their legs brushing, the air filled with the quiet hum of spring. Maya turned her face to him, not with hesitation this time, but with quiet certainty. When he kissed her, it wasn't a first kiss. It wasn't a reunion. It was something in between. Something built over years on pain, on second chances that should never have happened. In the weeks that followed, Declan started spending more nights at the apartment. He never brought work with him. He left his phone on silent during dinner. He told his assistant he wouldn't be traveling for the next 6 months. For the first time, his company was not the center of his universe. It was still important, but it wasn't everything. His everything was now wrapped up in small arms that hugged his legs when he walked in the door, and the woman who waited for him with tired eyes and warm tea. He started building a life that didn't need to be won or performed. It just needed to be lived. One rainy afternoon, Maya found him sitting in the living room, reading a space encyclopedia, with Noah on one knee and Ava snuggled up beside him. She stood in the doorway for a long time, watching them, her arms crossed, her heart full. When he looked up and saw her there, he smiled with the kind of smile she had never seen on him before. Not the charming, calculating grin of a man closing deals, but the soft, almost boyish expression of someone who had finally found where he belonged. Maya walked over, kissed his forehead, and whispered that this messy, ordinary, incredible life was something she never thought she would have again. Declan held her gaze, his voice low but firm, and said, "Me neither." And for the first time in their lives, that wasn't a loss. It was a beginning. Not a perfect one, not a fairy tale, but a real one, earned through pain, rebuilt with patience, and rooted in the kind of love that doesn't demand attention, but is proven in the silence, in showing up, in staying. They didn't need vows or guarantees. They had something better. They had each other, and this time, they weren't letting go. The power of presence. This story shows us that the cost of success is sometimes the loss of what truly matters. Declan learned that true power lies not in building an empire, but in the presence you offer to those who love you. Maya learned that strength is not about building walls, but about being brave enough to trust the quiet, consistent love that shows up day after day. Their love story is a testament to the fact that it's never too late to become the person you were meant to be. especially when two small, innocent faces give you a reason to fight for redemption. What did you think of the new ending? Rate this story from 1 to 10 in the comments. Like and share this video.